Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to talk about AB 4, and I really did try to restrain myself on this one, but I am way too passionate about this topic for me to let this debate go by without making my case. Unfortunately, I can't support the specifics of this bill because we cannot ask schools and teachers to do more without funding them adequately, and because we need to make sure that we're practicing good governance by crafting laws that align with DPI policies. So while urging my colleagues to vote no, I want to make an argument that now more than ever, we need more civics education. Why do I care so much about this topic? Before joining the legislature, I was a professor of sociology, and in that role, I taught students how power works in society so that they could understand how to accomplish an explicit goal of all of my courses, creating a world with more liberty and justice. I didn't think of it at the time, but if we take the League of Women Voters definition of civics, it's the study of the privileges and obligations of citizens. So I absolutely taught civics. My goal was to help students reject apathy and cynicism, to learn how to think and to feel empowered to change the world. To understand society, you have to understand our history and our founding legal documents. And so students would learn about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and we'd talk about what it meant that people could actually write, that all men were created equal, even while many of them were slave owners. Telling the truth about these contradictions didn't make them hate their country. Instead, it allowed them to deeply reflect upon a timeless struggle between holding an abstract belief in justice and succumbing to the dehumanizing greed that defines so much of our history and our present day. This contrast actually helped them understand the complexity and clarify their own morals and obligations, which is one of the points of education. Our current moment is its own clear case for why civics education is important. When my students learned about the rise of liberty and justice movements around the world that led to the American Revolution, they understood how, having just overthrown a king, our founders knew that the only way to protect freedom was to divide power into co-equal branches. We would then learn about how individual rights are spelled out in the various amendments, how the first guarantees freedom from religion, freedom of speech and of the press, and of the right to peaceably assemble and petition the government, how the interpretation of the second has evolved to now protect an individual right to bear arms. In other amendments, they'd see protections against arbitrary arrest, which is very relevant today, meaning there has to be evidence of having committed a crime or a signed and specific warrant to be taken into custody. And the right to a speedy trial. In my district, this is an extraordinarily relevant topic. We would explore protections against cruel and unusual punishment, and we would discuss the 13th Amendment and how it guaranteed the abolition of slavery, but how it failed to eradicate enslavement because slavery can still exist as punishment for a crime. And we learned about the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. We also learned about guaranteed protections and the right to vote regardless of race or sex. Are we, as a state, safeguarding these liberties? Because it's not enough to talk about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Our job is to make sure that we are defenders of these rights. One might say is empty rhetoric. The other would make liberty and justice a reality. Because the promise of our legal system only exists to the extent that we actually protect freedoms. For example, after the fall of Reconstruction, many black people in the South actually didn't get the right to vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Nearly 100 years after the 15th Amendment was ratified. But when my students learned that it was civil rights activists, many of whom were college students, who helped push that legislation through, they felt inspired. Because despite our country's long battles for justice and so many examples of failing to live up to our own creeds, my students always came away from my classes feeling empowered to fight for change. They would see that our history has always been a mix, where sometimes freedoms were expanded and sometimes, too often, our government fell short in fully including all people in the American story. AB 4 includes language about teaching students to have a sense of civic pride. Maybe that's what my students felt, or maybe they felt heartache, or some other more complicated feeling. I don't know. I never tested them on that, because when teaching, we should never tell students how to feel. But I do know that students who often started out as cynical learned instead a sense of responsibility.
maybe even an obligation to organize, advocate, and fight for changes they believed in. I know that many felt, some for the first time, that they could be a part of creating a better world. So that's what I think about when I think about civics and teaching and learning. And it's clear now more than ever that we need more people to understand what this means, our history, our legal frameworks, and our obligations. This bill doesn't strike the right balance, and so I will vote no, but I deeply believe in civics education, and I look forward to revisiting this topic when we adequately fund our schools. And when that time comes, my hope is that we commit to good governance, give this idea due consideration, provide time for adequate feedback and input, align with our Department of Public Instruction, and ensure that we're putting learning and our kids over partisanship. And finally, because of the nature of this speech, I'd just like to suggest that we all recommit to our own civics education. In fact, it is our obligation as lawmakers who have taken a vow to defend our state and federal constitutions. This is especially important now. In the face of so many threats to our legal system and to our freedoms, we must ensure that the work we do here is focused on securing liberty and justice for all. Thank you.